Grand Admiral Virith stood on the command deck of his flagship and looked out at the stars with the pride of a conqueror who had never known defeat. And behind him stood 50 officers who served the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. The fleet of the Zerani Galactic Empire that had crushed 900 species across 12,000 years of endless expansion. The Zerani were tall creatures with silver skin and 4 arms, and they believed themselves to be the rightful rulers of all space, and no species had ever proven them wrong. Not the insectoid Kroth, who had fought for a century before their queen surrendered. Not the aquatic Malori, who had hidden in their ocean worlds until the Empire boiled their seas. Not the proud warrior clans of Nexer Prime, who had chosen extinction over submission today. It was supposed to be a simple patrol through the Kethura system, a region of space the Empire had claimed 300 years ago. And the 47 warships under Virith's command moved through the void like predators, searching for prey that did not exist. Because nothing in this sector could threaten them. Nothing in any sector could threaten them. Then the alarms began to scream. "Admiral," shouted the sensor officer, a young Zorani named Korath, who had never seen real combat. "We have a contact appearing at the edge of the system. But that is impossible because there was no hyperspace signature, no quantum wake, no transition signal of any kind." Virith turned slowly because panic was beneath him, and he walked to the sensor display with the calm of someone who had seen 1,000 battles. But what he saw on that screen made his 4 hearts skip their rhythm for just a momenta. Ship had appeared from nowhere. The vessel was ugly by Zerani standards. All hard angles and brutal lines, without any of the elegant curves that marked Imperial design. And it bristled with weapon systems that the computer could not identify. And its hull was covered in strange markings that no database in the Empire could translate. How did it get here? Virith demanded, and his voice carried the edge of someone who was not used to asking questions he could not answer. "Unknown." "Admiral," Korath replied with fear in his voice, "our sensors show no method of arrival. The ship simply exists where it did not exist before, as if it materialized from empty space." This was wrong, and Virith knew it was wrong, because the Zerani had mastered faster-than-light travel 8,000 years ago, and they understood every method of crossing the stars. And no species had ever developed technology that could not detect. Ordered his communications officer to hail the unknown vessel, and the channel opened with a hiss of static before a voice responded in perfect Zerani language, which should have been impossible because this species was unknown to them. "We are the U.E.'s Defiant, representing the United Earth Confederacy," the voice said, and it belonged to a creature that appeared on their screens. A being with soft skin and 2 arms and eyes that held no fear despite being surrounded by an Imperial battle group. "You have been annexing species under your protection doctrine, and we are here to discuss terms." Virith stared at the creature on his screen and felt something he had not felt in 200 years of service. And that feeling was confusion mixed with the first cold touch of uncertainty. "Earth?" He said the word like it was a disease. "We have no record of any world called Earth. We have no record of any species that looks like you. And we have no record of any civilization called the United Earth Confederacy." The creature on the screen smiled, and that smile carried a weight that Virith did not understand. A weight that spoke of secrets and power and something ancient hiding behind those strange soft eyes. "We know," the human said. "We have been watching you for a very long time, Admiral, and we have decided that it is time to introduce ourselves." Watching them, Virith thought. And the idea was absurd because the Empire had surveillance systems across the entire galaxy. Because nothing moved between the stars without Zerani knowledge. Because they were the masters of all space and all species bow before their might. "You will surrender your vessel immediately," Virith commanded, and his voice carried the full authority of 12,000 years of Imperial dominance. "You will submit to inspection, and you will answer our questions about your origin and your technology. And if you comply, you will be treated with mercy according to the protection doctrine of the Galactic Empire." The human captain tilted her head slightly, and that smile never left her face. And she spoke with a calmness that seemed wrong for someone facing 47 warships. "My name is Captain Kira-chan," she said, "and I'm afraid I must decline your generous offer, Admiral, because we did not come here to surrender. We came here to deliver a message." "And what message is that?" Virith asked, and his finger hovered over the command that would order his fleet to open fire. "The message is simple," Captain Chun replied. "You will withdraw from the 17 star systems that contain pre-spaceflight civilizations. You will stop your expansion into territories where young species are still developing. And you will answer for the crimes you have committed against those who could not defend themselves." The command deck of the Eternal Dominion fell silent, and every officer stared at the screen with disbelief painted across their silver faces. Because no one had ever spoken to the Empire this way. Because no one had ever dared to make demands of the Zoran Nivereth laughed, and his laughter echoed through the deck. And his officers joined him because the idea was simply too absurd to take seriously. One ship making demands of the greatest military power in galactic history. "You are brave," Virith said when his laughter faded. "I will grant you that much, little creature. But bravery without power is just foolishness. And you have made a terrible mistake coming here alone." He raised his hand and gave the order that had ended 1,000 civilizations before this day. All ships open fire. The 47 warships of the Third Expansionary Fleet unleashed their weapons in perfect unison, and beams of plasma and missiles of antimatter and projectiles of compressed matter all raced toward the single human vessel with enough destructive force to crack. A small moon captain. Chun watched the barrage approach on her tactical display, and her crew of 600 humans remained calm at their stations. And she gave a single quiet order. "Show them." The weapon's fire reached the Defiant, and then something impossible happened. Something that made Grand Admiral Virith grip the railing of his command deck with all four hands. Something that would haunt his final moments. The barrage stopped, every beam and missile and projectile. Simply froze in space 300 meters from the human ship. Suspended in place like insects caught in amber. Glowing and burning but going nowhere. And then the frozen fire reversed. Direction Virith had 1 second to understand what was happening, before the weapons of his own fleet came screaming back at them with twice their original speed. And the last thing he saw was the calm face of Captain Kira-chan watching him through the view screen as his flagship came apart. Around him, the Third Expansionary Fleet died in 11 seconds. 47 warships that had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and enforced imperial law across 100 star systems were reduced to expanding clouds of debris and cooling plasma. And the only ship left intact was the Defiant, hanging motionless in space, surrounded by the wreckage of what had been the pride of the Zorani military captain. Chun opened a channel to the imperial homeworld. A transmission that would cross the galaxy and reach the ears of Empress Zorth Ix herself. "That was your warning shot," she said. And then the Defiant vanished as mysteriously as it had arrived, leaving nothing behind but silence and destruction and a message that would change the galaxy forever. The news of the Third Fleet's destruction traveled across the Galactic Empire like a shockwave. And in the throne room of the Imperial Palace on the homeworld of Zoran Prime, Empress Zorth Ix sat upon her ancient seat of power and listened to the reports with growing fury in her 4 hearts. She was old by Zorani standards, having ruled for 300 years, and her silver skin had faded to pale gray. But her mind was sharp and her will was iron. And she had crushed 17 rebellions during her reign without mercy or hesitation. "Tell me again," She commanded the messenger who knelt before her throne. "Tell me how 47 of my warships were destroyed by a single vessel." The messenger trembled because bearers of bad news did not always survive in the imperial court. But he spoke the truth because lying to the empress was worse than death. The recordings from the battle show weapons, fire being stopped and reversed. "Your Majesty," he said, "the technology is beyond anything our scientists can explain." And the ship called the Defiant disappeared without any detectable method of departure. "And these creatures call themselves humans," the Empress said, the word like it was poison on her tongue. "From a world called Earth that does not exist in any of our star charts." "That is correct." "Your Majesty." The throne room was filled with the highest nobles and military commanders of the empire, and they whispered among themselves with fear and anger mixing in their voices, because this was unprecedented. Because the Zerani had never faced an enemy they could not understand, far across the galaxy. Aboard the Defiant as it traveled through folded space toward its next destination, Captain Kira Chun held a meeting with her senior officers in the ship's war room. "The destruction of the Third Fleet will get their attention," said Commander Marcus Webb, a first officer and a man who had served with her for 20 years. "But it will also make them angry. And angry empires do stupid things." "That is exactly what we want," Chun replied. And she pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy that showed the 17 star systems they had marked for liberation. The Zerani have been conquering primitive species for thousands of years under their so-called protection doctrine. And they believe they are doing those species a favor by absorbing them into the empire. "They strip mine their worlds and use their populations as labor," said Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the ship's chief science officer. "We have been observing them for 2 centuries. And we have documented over 400 species that were effectively enslaved under the guise of protection." This was the truth that humanity had discovered when they first encountered evidence of the Galactic Empire. A truth that had changed everything for the United Earth Confederacy 200 years ago. Human explorers had found the wreckage of a Zerani scout ship in a distant system. And from that wreckage, they had learned of the Empire's existence. And they had made a choice that would define their civilization. They chose to hide humanity, had developed its technology in secret. Watching the Empire from the shadows, studying their methods and their weaknesses, and preparing for the day when they would be strong enough to challenge the conquerors of the galaxy. That day had finally arrived. "The evacuation fleet is in position," reported Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, the ship's tactical officer. 17 ships are ready to extract the populations of the protected species. And the jamming technology is prepared to disable any Zerani interference. Chan nodded and looked at the faces of her officers. Men and women who had trained their entire lives for this mission. Humans who carried the weight of their species' dark history and the hope of a better future. 200 years ago, "We could have tried to make contact with the Empire," she said. "We could have revealed ourselves and hoped for peaceful relations, but we studied them, and we learned who they truly are." She touched the holographic display and images appeared. Images of devastated worlds and enslaved populations and the broken remains of civilizations that had been absorbed into the Zerani Empire. "They see themselves as saviors," Chung continued. "They believe they are lifting primitive species up to civilization. But what they actually do is destroy everything that makes those species unique. They take their resources and their labor and their future, and they call it protection." Commander Webb spoke up with the hard voice of a soldier who had seen too much in his long career. "The Zerani have never met a species they could not conquer," he said. "They have never faced anyone who could fight back, and that has made them arrogant beyond measure." "And arrogance," Chun replied, "is a weakness we can exploit." The Defiant emerged from folded space above a world called Tessara, a planet of peaceful insectoid creatures who had been under Zerani protection for 500 years. And in orbit around that world sat a garrison, fleet of 12 warships that existed to keep the Tesserans obedient. Zorani, commander of that fleet, saw the human ship appear and immediately recognized it from the reports that had spread across the Empire, and he knew he should call for reinforcements. But pride stopped him because he could not admit that he feared a single vessel. All ships target that human craft. He ordered, "We will succeed where the Third Fleet failed, and we will bring glory to the Empire." His 12 ships opened fire, and once again the weapons stopped before reaching the Defiant. And once again they reversed direction and destroyed the vessels that had launched them. But this time, the Defiant was not alone. 16 more human ships appeared in orbit around Tessara. But these were not warships. These were massive transport vessels designed to carry millions of passengers. And they began descending toward the planet's surface on the ground. Zorani soldiers watched in confusion as the human transports landed near the great hive cities of the Tesserans. And the humans emerged not with weapons, but with translators and medical supplies and offers of freedom. "We are here to take you away from this place," the human ambassadors told the Tesseran queens. "We are here to give you a choice that the Empire never offered." The Tesserans had lived under Zorani rule for 500 years, and they had forgotten what freedom felt like. But the humans showed them records of their own history, images of a Tessara before the Empire came. And the queens wept with joy and sorrow as they remembered who their people had once been. The evacuation began. Millions of Tesserans boarded the human transports, carrying nothing but their eggs and their memories. And the Zorani ground forces tried to stop them, but found that their weapons would not fire, and their vehicles would not start, and their communications would not connect. "How are they doing this?" screamed the Zorani garrison commander as he watched his authority crumble around him. "What kind of technology can disable everything we have?" There was no answer because the humans had no interest in explaining themselves to the soldiers of an empire built on conquest. Same scene played out across all 17 systems. Human evacuation fleets appeared above worlds, where primitive species had been suffering under imperial protection, and they offered those species a choice, and every single one of them chose to leave with the humans rather than remain with the Empire when the evacuations were complete. Captain Chun broadcast a message that reached every corner of Zorani space. "These species have chosen to accept humanity's protection." Her voice echoed across 1,000 worlds. "Interfere, and the consequences will be absolute." Then the human ships vanished, taking with them millions of freed beings who would never again bow to the Zorani. And they left behind an empire that was finally beginning to understand fear. Empress Zorith Ix received the reports in her throne room, and her ancient face twisted with rage as she realized that these humans had humiliated her in a way no enemy had ever managed. "Summon the War Council," she commanded, and her voice was cold with hatred. "We will find this earth, and we will burn it until nothing remains but ashes and regret." The Empire was going to war, and they would learn that some enemies cannot be conquered. The War Council of the Galactic Empire gathered in the Chamber of Conquest, a vast hall decorated with the trophies of 12,000 years of victory, and the walls were lined with the flags of 900 defeated species and the weapons of generals who had challenged Zorani supremacy and lost Empress. Zorith Ix sat at the head of the great table and looked at the faces of her admirals and generals and ministers, and she saw fear hiding behind their masks of duty. And that fear made her furious because the Zorani were supposed to be the ones who inspired fear in others. 4,000 warships, she announced, and her voice silenced every whisper in the chamber. "That is what we will send to find these humans and destroy them. 4,000 of our finest vessels crewed by our best warriors. Enough firepower to burn 100 worlds." Grand Marshal Theron the supreme commander of all imperial military forces, rose from his seat with the slow dignity of someone who had earned his rank through a lifetime of conquest. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, because even he could be executed for speaking out of turn. "We have analyzed the recordings from both engagements with the human vessel, and our scientists cannot explain how their technology works." "I do not care how it works," the Empress snapped. "I care about results. And the result will be the extinction of this species that dares to challenge us." "But Your Majesty," Darren continued despite the danger, "if one ship could destroy 47 of ours, and another could disable 12 while simultaneously jamming an entire garrison, then how can we be certain that 4,000 will be enough?" The question hung in the air like poison, and every member of the War Council felt the weight of it pressing down on them. Because it was the question they had all been thinking, but none had dared to speak. Minister Verth, the head of Imperial Intelligence, cleared her throat and stepped forward with a tablet containing her latest reports. "We have spent the past 3 weeks searching for any information about these humans," she said, "and we have found nothing. There is no world called Earth in any star chart. There is no species matching their description in any database. There is no record of any contact with the United Earth Confederacy." "Then how do they know our language?" demanded Admiral Korath, the son of the censor officer who had died aboard the Eternal Dominion. "How do they know about our protection doctrine? How do they know which systems to target?" "They claim to have been watching us," Minister Verth replied. "And if that is true, then they have surveillance capabilities that surpass anything we possess." The implications of that statement spread through the War Council like a disease. Because if the humans could watch the Empire without being detected, then they could be anywhere. They could be everywhere. They could be watching this very meeting. Empress Zorath Ix slammed her 4 fists against the table with enough force to crack the ancient wood. "I will not cower in my own palace," she declared. "I will not let fear of these creatures paralyze us into inaction. We are the Galactic Empire. We have conquered the galaxy, and we will not be intimidated by a species that hides in the shadows." She rose from her throne and walked to the great window that overlooked the capital city of Zoran Prime, a metropolis of silver towers and floating platforms that had stood for 10,000 years as a monument to Zorani superiority. "Find them," she ordered without turning around. "Send scouts into every corner of space. Follow any trace they may have left behind, and when you find their homeworld, you will report its location to me." "And then, Your Majesty?" Grand Marshal Theron asked. "And then I will personally lead the armada that wipes them from existence." The scouts went out in every direction. Thousands of small, fast ships equipped with the most advanced sensors the Empire possessed. And they searched for 6 months through regions of space the Zorani had never bothered to explore. Found the trail by accident. A scout captain named Lyris was investigating an unremarkable star system at the edge of known space when her sensors detected something strange. A faint quantum signature that matched the traces left behind when the human ships had vanished. She followed that signature to another system, and then another, and slowly she mapped a path that led deeper into unexplored territory than any Zorani had ever traveled. "Report to the Empress immediately," she ordered her communications officer. "Tell her we have found the path to Earth, back on Zoran Prime." Empress Zorath Ix received the news with cold satisfaction, and she immediately ordered the assembly of the greatest military force in Imperial history. 4,000 warships gathered in orbit around the homeworld, a fleet so massive that it blocked out the stars. And aboard the lead vessel stood the Empress herself in her golden armor, ready to lead her people to victory. "Today we march to war," she broadcast to every ship in the Armada. "Today we will show these humans what happens to those who challenge the might of the Galactic Empire. Today we will burn their world and salt their ground and make their name a curse that children whisper in fear." The armada departed with cheering crowds, watching from the surface below. And the journey would take 6 months of hard travel through uncharted space. But Zorathix was patient because revenge was a dish best served cold during those 6 months. The humans were not idle, Captain. Kira Chun received reports from observation posts scattered throughout the galaxy, watching the Armada's progress with calm interest. They are coming, she told the Council of Earth, the governing body of the United Earth Confederacy. 4,000 warships led by the Empress herself, Admiral James Morrison, Supreme Commander of the human fleet, studied the tactical projections with the experienced eye of a warrior who had trained his entire life for this moment. We could stop them long before they reach Seoul, he said. Our slip drives give us perfect mobility. We could pick them apart piece by piece during their journey. No, Chun replied. And the council members turned to look at her. We need to let them see. See what? Asked President Sarah Okonkwo, the elected leader of the Confederacy and descendant of the scientist who had helped develop human slip drive technology 2 centuries ago. Everything, Chun said. We need them to understand exactly what they are facing, not just our weapons or our ships, but who we are and how we became this way. She pulled up a holographic display that showed the Sol system in all its developed glory. 42 human worlds connected by a network of slipgates, defended by a fleet of 3,000 warships that could appear anywhere in the galaxy within seconds if we destroy them in deep space. They will never understand, Chun explained. They will think they were beaten by superior technology and nothing more. And the survivors will go home and build better weapons and come back again. But if we show them the truth, President Okonkwo said slowly as understanding dawned, if we let them see what humanity really is, then they will understand that they can never win, Chun finished. Not because we have better ships, but because we have something they have never faced before. And what is that? Admiral Morrison asked. Chun smiled, and in that smile was the weight of human history. All the wars and suffering and survival that had forged her species into something the galaxy had never seen. We have been where they are, she said. We have been the conquerors, the empire builders, the ones who believed might made right, and we learned the hard way that it does not. The council voted unanimously to let the Jirani Armada reach Seoul. They would come with fire and hatred in their hearts, and they would learn a lesson that would change the galaxy forever. The Imperial Armada emerged from its final jump into the Sol system, and for a long moment there was only silence on every bridge of every ship as 4,000 crews stared at what awaited them. Empress Zorathix had expected to find a single world, perhaps a handful of colonies, a young species that had developed one impressive technology. And nothing more. She had not expected this Earth, hung in space like a blue jewel, surrounded by orbital platforms and defense stations and shipyards that dwarfed anything the Empire had ever built. And beyond Earth were more worlds, dozens of them, all showing signs of human habitation and development. Sensors are showing 42 populated planets in this system alone, reported the flagship sensor officer with a trembling voice. And our long-range scans are detecting similar development in neighboring star systems. That is impossible, Zorathix whispered. And for the first time in 300 years of rule, she felt small. No species could develop this quickly without us knowing. But the evidence was right in front of her. An entire civilization that had grown in the shadows while the Empire looked elsewhere. A power that had hidden its strength until it was ready to reveal itself. Your Majesty. Admiral Karth approached the Empress with fear poorly hidden on his silver face. We are detecting a fleet assembling near the 3rd planet. Preliminary counts suggest at least 3,000 warships. 3,000 against 4,000. Those were odds the Empire could work with. Those were odds that still favored the Zorani if they pressed the attack. All ships prepare for battle. Zorath the Ninth commanded, and her voice carried the determination of someone who had come too far to turn back. "We will crush them with superior numbers," and she never finished that sentence. The human fleet did not advance toward them. It simply appeared around them. 3,000 warships materializing from nowhere to surround the Imperial Armada in a sphere of gleaming metal and obvious power. How? Korath gasped as his tactical display filled with contacts that had not existed a second ago. "They fold space." The sensor officer replied with awe and terror mixing in his voice. "They do not travel through distance. They remove distance entirely. They can be anywhere instantly." Zorath X understood then what she was truly facing. And for the first time in her long life, she felt the cold grip of genuine fear wrap around her foreheart. Transmission cut through the fleet-wide communications, overriding every channel with the ease of someone who had complete control over the situation. "Empress Zorath X," said the calm voice of Captain Kira Chun. "Welcome to Seoul. We have been expecting you." The Empress straightened her spine and refused to let her fear show on her face. "You cannot defeat us," she declared with more confidence than she felt. 4,000 warships will overwhelm your defenses, and even if you destroy half my fleet, the survivors will burn your worlds." "You misunderstand," Chun replied. And there was something in her voice that sounded almost like pity. "We did not bring you here to fight you. We brought you here to teach you." Before Zorath X could respond, her tactical officer shouted a warning. "Your Majesty, the human ships are transmitting something. It appears to be historical data. They are sending it to every vessel in the Armada, across 4,000 warships." Screens flickered to life with images that no Zorani had ever seen before. Images of humanity's past, stretching back thousands of years. They saw wars, not the organized conquests of the Zorani, but savage, brutal conflicts that consumed entire continents. Millions of humans killing each other with weapons of increasing sophistication and horror. Trenches filled with poison gas, and cities consumed by fire from the sky, and mushroom clouds rising over destroyed metropolises. They saw the weapons humanity had created to destroy itself nuclear. Bombs capable of ending civilization. Biological agents designed to wipe out populations. Chemical weapons that killed in ways too horrible to describe. And the Zorani officers watched with growing horror as they realized these creatures had developed extinction-level technology and pointed it at their own kind. What manner of species creates weapons to destroy themselves? Admiral Karth asked with genuine confusion. "Keep watching," Chun's voice replied over the communication channel. The historical records continued. And now they showed something different. They showed humans choosing not to use those weapons. They showed treaties signed and arsenals dismantled. They showed enemies becoming allies and hatreds being set aside. They showed a species that had stood at the edge of self-destruction and pulled itself back through sheer force of will. "We were what you are," Chen explained as the images played across the Armada. "We were conquerors and empire builders. We believed that strength gave us the right to dominate others. We enslaved and exploited and destroyed anything that stood in our way." The records showed human history's darkest chapters. The empires that had risen and fallen. The civilizations that had been crushed beneath the boots of invaders. The countless generations who had known nothing but war and suffering. And then we nearly ended ourselves. Chun continued. "We came so close to extinction that we could feel its breath on our necks. And in that moment we had to choose what kind of species we wanted to be." The images shifted again, showing the aftermath of humanity's last great war. Cities rebuilding from ashes and former enemies working together. The slow, painful process of learning to be better than they had been. "We chose to change," Chun said. "Not because we were weak, but because we were strong enough to look at what we had become and hate it. We took all that rage and aggression and turned it toward a single purpose. And what purpose is that?" Zorath the Ninth asked, and her voice had lost its commanding edge, making sure no other species has to go through what we did. The Empress looked at the human warships surrounding her armada, and she understood now why they had let her come here. Why they had not destroyed her fleet in the depths of space where no one would have witnessed. They wanted her to see. They wanted her to understand that humanity had not become powerful by accident, that their technology was the product of thousands of years of conflict and survival, that every weapon they possessed had been developed to fight themselves before it was ever turned against the stars. Your empire has never struggled, Chun said. You evolved as the dominant species on a gentle world. You expanded into space without opposition. You conquered other species because you could, not because you had to. War for you is a tool of administration, a simple extension of policy. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of human history. War for us was survival. It was neighbors trying to exterminate each other. It was cities burning while children screamed. It was mothers burying sons and fathers avenging daughters. We learned war in the hardest school imaginable. And we graduated at the top of our class. Admiral Korath looked at the tactical data scrolling across his screen. The analysis of human technology and capabilities. And he understood what the Empress was only beginning to grasp. The humans were not showing them this history to brag. They were showing it as a warning. You came here with 4,000 ships, Chum said. You came to burn our world and kill our people and teach us a lesson about challenging the Empire. So let me tell you what is going to happen instead. The human warships began to move, their formation tightening around the armada like a fist slowly closing. We are going to take your weapons offline. We are going to disable your drives, and we are going to leave you drifting here for 3 days. You would not dare, Zorath Ix snarled. But there was no conviction behind her words. 3 days, Chun repeated. Long enough for every soldier in your armada to understand what it feels like to be helpless. Long enough for you to experience the fear that every species you have conquered has felt when your ships appeared in their skies. And after 3 days? The Empress asked. After 3 days, we will send you home, every ship and every crew member, alive and unharmed. There was confusion on the command deck, and Zorath Ix felt that confusion herself, because this was not how wars were supposed to end. This was not how enemies were supposed to behave. Why? She demanded. You could destroy us right now. You could end the threat of the Empire forever. Why would you show us mercy? Chun's answer was simple and devastating. Because we remember what it was like to be the Empire, she said. And we remember what it took to become something better. And we are going to give you the chance to learn that lesson without the suffering we had to endure. The human ships activated their disabling technology. And across the armada, every weapon went offline. Every engine went dark. Every system that could be used for war simply stopped working. 4,000 Zorani warships hung helpless in the void, surrounded by an enemy that could have destroyed them but chose mercy instead. And Empress Zorath Ix sat on her command throne and watched her power crumble around her, and tried to understand the lesson she was being taught. 3 days passed in silence for the crews of the Imperial Armada. 3 days of floating helpless in the void while human ships watched from every direction. 3 days that changed everything. Empress Zorath Ix spent those 3 days thinking about what she had seen. The images of human history playing over and over in her mind. The wars and the weapons and the choice to become something different. She had ruled for 300 years. And in all that time, she had never questioned the rightness of the Empire's actions. She had never wondered if there might be another way to build a civilization. Now she wondered. When the 3 days ended, the human ships reactivated the Armada systems one by one, starting with life support and communications, and ending with the engines that would carry them home. Captain Kira Chun appeared on the view screen. One final time. And she looked at the Empress with eyes that held no hatred. Only a strange kind of hope. You are free to go, Chun said. Return to your homeworld and tell your people what you have seen here. And if we come back? Zorath the Ninth asked, and she genuinely wanted to know the answer. If we rebuild our fleet and return with even greater numbers? Then we will be here, Chun replied. And we will do exactly what we did today, as many times as it takes. Until you understand that conquest is not the only way. The Armada departed soul in silence. 4,000 ships that had come with dreams of glory, returning with the taste of humiliation in their mouths. But also with something else, something that felt almost like hope. The journey home took 6 months. And during that time, Zorath Ix did something she had never done before she listened. She walked through her flagship and spoke with common soldiers and officers alike. And she asked them what they thought about what they had experienced. And the answers surprised her. I was angry at first, said a young weapons officer named Thyra. I wanted revenge. I wanted to go back with 1,000 more ships and make them pay for humiliating us. And now? The Empress asked. Now I think about those images they showed us, Thyra replied. Those records of their history. And I wonder what would have happened to us if we had faced the same challenges. Similar conversations happened across the Armada. Soldiers and officers struggling to understand an enemy who had shown them mercy when destruction would have been easier. When the Armada finally returned to Zoran Prime, the Empress found her throne room filled with nobles and ministers who demanded immediate retaliation, who screamed for vengeance against the humans who had shamed the Empire. We must rebuild, shouted Grand Marshal Theron. We must construct 10,000 ships and return to burn their worlds. We must show them that the Empire cannot be humiliated, cried Minister Vereth. Or every species we have conquered will rise up against us. Zorath the Ninth listened to their rage and their fear. And then she raised her 4 hands for silence. I have ruled for 300 years, she said. And her voice carried the weight of her long reign. I have conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and expanded our borders to the edges of known space. She paused and looked at the faces around her. The faces of people who had never known defeat, who had never questioned the righteousness of their cause. And in 3 days of helplessness, I learned more about power than I did in 3 centuries of wielding it. The throne room fell silent as the Empress spoke words that no Zorani ruler had ever spoken before. The humans could have destroyed us, she said. They had the power to end our entire armada and leave the Empire defenseless, but they chose mercy instead. And I have spent 6 months trying to understand why. Because they are weak, Grand Marshal Theron insisted. Because they lack the conviction to do what must be done. No, Zorath Ix replied. And her voice was firm with certainty. They showed me their history. They showed me what they had done to themselves and to each other. They showed me creatures who had developed weapons that could end their entire species. She stood from her throne and walked to the window that overlooked her capital city. They were not weak, she continued. They were so strong that they could look at what they had become and choose to be different. They had the courage to change when change was the hardest thing imaginable. What are you saying, Your Majesty? Minister Vereth asked with fear growing in her voice. I am saying that an invitation arrived this morning. Zorath Ix turned to face her court. The humans have proposed a treaty, and I intend to accept it. The uproar was immediate and furious. Nobles screaming about betrayal and disgrace. Military commanders threatening resignation. Ministers warning of chaos and collapse, but Zorath Ix had made her decision. And when the Empress of the Galactic Empire made a decision, the galaxy listened. The treaty was signed aboard the Defiant in orbit above Earth. And representatives from both species gathered to witness. The moment that would change history, the terms were simple but revolutionary. The Empire would release all species currently held under the Protection Doctrine. allowing them to choose their own futures freely. The humans would share their medical and agricultural technology with anyone who requested it. Without payment or obligation, both species would work together to protect the young civilizations of the galaxy. Not through conquest, but through support when the signing was complete. Captain Kira Chun walked with Empress Zorth Ix through the corridors of the Defiant, showing her the photographs that lined the walls. "These are images from our history," Chun explained. "The wars and the suffering, but also the rebuilding and the hope." Zorth Ix stopped before a photograph of a human city, half destroyed by war and half rebuilt by determination. "How long did it take?" she asked. "How long did it take your species to change?" "Generations," Chun replied honestly. "We are still changing. We are still learning. Every day we have to choose who we want to be. And you think we can do the same?" Chun smiled, and it was the same smile she had worn when facing the Third Fleet so many months ago. But now it carried warmth instead of warning. "I think every species has the potential to be better than they are," she said. "I think the hardest part is admitting that change is necessary. And you have already done that." The Empress looked out a viewport at the blue world hanging in space below them, and she saw the evidence of human civilization. The orbital platforms and defense stations and shipyards that represented the power of a species that had chosen growth over destruction. "We were afraid of you," she admitted. "When your ship first appeared in the Kethera system, we felt fear for the first time in thousands of years." "And now?" Chun asked. "Now I understand that the fear was not about your weapons or your ships," Zorthix said slowly. "The fear was about what you represented. The possibility that everything we believed about strength and power was wrong." She turned to face the human captain with something new in her ancient eyes. Something that looked almost like respect. "You showed us that mercy can be stronger than conquest," the Empress continued. "You showed us that choosing peace requires more courage than choosing war." "We learned that lesson the hard way," Chun replied. "We nearly destroyed ourselves learning it. And we did not want you to have to suffer the same way." "Why?" Zorith IX asked the question that had haunted her for 6 months. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Chun thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "Because we remember being where you are," she said finally. "We remember being young and powerful and certain that might made right. And we remember what it cost us to learn the truth." She gestured at the photographs on the walls. "The images of human triumph and tragedy. We are not better than you," Chun continued. "We are just further along the same path. And we believe that every species deserves the chance to walk that path without having to pay the price we paid." The treaty transformed the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. Species that had lived under imperial protection for centuries rediscovered their own cultures and traditions. They rebuilt their worlds and developed their own technologies and reached toward the stars on their own terms. The Empire did not collapse as many had feared. Instead, it changed. It grew. It learned to measure its greatness, not by how many species it controlled, but by how many species it helped. Helpegereth IX ruled for another 100 years. And when she finally passed her throne to her successor, she left behind an empire that would have been unrecognizable to her ancestors and across the galaxy. Species that had once cowered in fear began to look up at the stars with hope, because they knew that somewhere out there, humanity was watching, not watching with weapons ready and conquest in their hearts, but watching with memory of their own dark history and determination, that others would not have to repeat it, watching as guardians instead of conquerors, watching and waiting to help whenever help was needed, because that was what humanity had chosen to be. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference in the archives of the new Galactic Alliance. Scholars would write about this period for thousands of years to come, and they would struggle to explain how a single ship appearing out of nowhere had changed everything. but the survivors of that era knew the truth. It was never about the ship, it was about the species inside it. A species that had emerged from fire and blood and somehow found the strength to choose mercy, a species that remembered what it was like to be small and afraid and alone, a species called humanity, and that made all the difference.